Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Mario Cristobal, the Miami Hurricanes working their way through spring practice, and you can kind of just get the sense from reading the spring practice notes, how the players talk in the post-practice press conferences. The physicality is starting to get ramped up a little bit. I think more importantly, starting to become a little bit more competitive out there as we put on the pads, and you continue to hear some really intriguing names that are stepping up for Miami. And I think most specifically coming out of this Tuesday morning practice, you are starting to hear some names at some positions that we really wanted to see some guys emerge heading into 2025. Want to get into some of those names and positions. Before we get into it, as always, the Miami Hurricane fans, appreciate you guys. Y'all been dialed in. We've been talking a lot on the recruiting trail, been talking a lot about spring practice intel. The amount of support that the Miami Hurricane fans have shown the boys over the last couple of weeks, it's been amazing. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into it. And I want to start at, arguably the biggest question mark for this Miami Hurricanes football team is not just in the secondary. To me, it's specifically the safety room. Because I look at the cornerback position. I mean, you have OJ Frederick coming back. You bring in Xavier Lucas. You bring in Charles Brantley, Emmanuel Carnley, Ethan O'Connor, Damari Brown coming back healthy. I look at that unit and say it's hard for me to see it being a problem in 2025. In fact, on paper, from what we see on paper, the cornerback position should be really freaking good in 2025. I think the big question mark we have as it pertains to the secondary is what we have at the safety position. Now, Zachariah Poyser, we know we got one guy. We know we got one difference maker in that safety room. The rest of that safety room, I think, is a question mark. Who's going to be the guy playing opposite Zachariah Poyser in the back end of this defense? Markeith Williams starting to emerge a little bit. And I think what's most notable about what we heard from Markeith Williams in this Tuesday morning practice, he is sticky in man coverage. A lot of one-on-one work with wide receivers and defensive backs. The biggest problem, why I think it's so, important to hear Markeith Williams not only playing some good football for Miami, but more specifically sticky in man coverage, because that was what Miami was just, it was a disaster for Miami in the 2024 year. You just didn't have the athletes in the safety position to win in man coverage. And when you are trying to play high level defense and you are going to start blitzing your front seven a little bit, you have to rely on your safeties at times to hold up in man coverage. Miami just, they couldn't do it in 2024. Didn't have good enough players. To hear that Markeith Williams at 6'2", $175, he's got a slender frame that I think he needs to add some weight onto that frame heading into 2025. But to hear that 6'2" Markeith Williams is sticky in coverage, getting his hands on a lot of football, specifically when he's operating in man, that's about as good of intel as you could have heard if you're a Miami Hurricane fan monitoring spring practice. You're also hearing some decent things about Dylan Day too. And it's not me being out on Zaquan Patterson. I think I was a huge fan of Zaquan Patterson coming out of high school. Certainly had some growing pains and probably had to play a little bit earlier than Mario Cristobal probably wanted him to during his freshman year in 2024. This is not me saying Zaquan Patterson's not going to be a good football player for Miami in 2025, but I don't think Miami fans care, who's starting at safety opposite Zachariah Poyser, but we are looking for a player to kind of step up and win that job in your heart. Starting to hear that Markeith Williams could be that guy. Now, for Markeith Williams specifically, you're probably looking for him to continue that consistency as we get into full pads, as we start becoming a little bit more physical, because you look at the big question mark with Markeith Williams, 6'2", $175, and he looks like he's a $175 dripping wet. It's a very, very slender frame. You want to see him when we get a little bit more real in spring practice, as we roll into fall camp and we start getting a little bit more physical. Can Markeith Williams continue to play solid football for Miami? But if I asked a lot of Miami fans, I think that follow this program closely and said, hey, what are some positions you want to hear guys step up in? Safety, that safety position, along with probably the pass catcher position, are the two positions you're looking to hear some names step up, and you're kind of getting that from a guy in Markeith Williams. Damari Brown back out there moving around. I think that's solid for Miami. I'm not ready to sell my stock on a guy like Damari Brown because I thought he looked pretty dang promising as a true freshman back in 2023. The next piece that I think is really emerging is the depth. The depth is emerging on the defensive line. Now, we know what we have with David Blay. I think we know what we have with Ahmad Moten. From what we've been hearing about Justin Scott, we've talked a lot about him over the last couple of weeks. We kind of know what we can get with Justin Scott. Now it's, hey, how good can he be? The name that I thought was most intriguing, and I'll raise my hand and say I certainly did not have on my bingo card, Dante Simpson. True freshman, early enrollee, young for his grade. I believe he's not even maybe 18 years old right now. He's a young cat that is playing on a college football field right now when he should be a senior in high school, playing some good football. Now, do I think Dante Simpson starts for Miami in 2025? I do not. But we talk about this all the time. Depth on the defensive line is massive. It's one of the most underrated discussions that I think we have in the sport where, look, it's important to have your top guys or guys that are going to be the NFL draft picks, but you're 2 and 3 deep, specifically on the defensive line when you want to rotate those big bodies and keep them fresh, not only for 12 games of a season, but 4 quarters of a football game. You got to have guys emerge. Really, on the defensive line, you're only as good as your depth. We know we got a couple of guys we can count on. Artavius Jones is working through an injury. We haven't heard a ton about Josh Horton. Dante Simpson emerging as a guy that, look, he doesn't have to play 40 snaps for us, but can he play 10 to 15, maybe 15 to 20 quality snaps a game? That's an interesting name to monitor. And he was a fascinating kid coming out of high school. Local kid at undersized interior defensive lineman that had some really sneaky athleticism and some polish to his game, a guy that knows how to get into the backfield. I think that's an intriguing name to watch as we get the full pads on and say, hey, can he continue to look good as we become a little bit more competitive along the line of scrimmage as spring practice rolls through? Dante Simpson, a name to watch. I think the other intriguing storyline on the defensive line is Akeem Mesidor dropping a little bit of weight. I think why he was playing so big, in fact, I know why he was playing so big last year, is because he spent a lot of time on the inside of the defensive line, which is clearly not his best position. You get the best out of Akeem Mesidor when he's playing out there on the edge, losing a little bit of weight. I have no question marks about his physicality. Both him and Ruben Bain, I think, have lost a little weight. Look, Ruben Bain and Akeem Mesidor holding up in the run game, being strong at the point of attack. I don't think any of us have questions about their physicality as edge defenders. Dropping a little weight, can they be difference makers, better difference makers as pass rushers in the 2025 year? I think that's encouraging to hear both Ruben Bain and Akeem Mesidor getting a little bit lighter and getting a little bit more athletic going into 2025. And I starting to feel really good about the 2 deep here with Armando Blunt and Hayden Lowe. You keep hearing really good feedback from both Armando Blunt and Hayden Lowe. I look at, that 4, Ruben Bain, Akeem Mesidor, Armando Blunt, Hayden Lowe. That's how you want your 2 deep out on the edge to look. And I'm high on what this defensive line can be. And we talk about it all the time. You look at Miami, I think if we're talking about a Miami defense that takes a massive step in the right direction in 2025, which I think is very realistic, new coaching staff, a lot of new players, I think it's going to start up front with this defensive line that was solid in 2024. It wasn't a bad unit. Can they be elite? Can they wreck games? Can they be dominant in the ACC in 2025? That's always been Mario Cristobal's plan. When he got to Miami, I think he looked at the landscape of the ACC and said, hey, we can be a program that dominates the line of scrimmage in this conference. You certainly got that from the offensive line. Now, can we get that from the defensive line in the 2025 year? Going to the offensive side of the football, I think that the thing that continues to stand out to me is as I get this depth chart right here, The thing that continues to stand out to me about Miami on offense is the young pass catchers are staying consistent. And that's like the big storyline when you go through spring practice and fall camp, when you're talking about year one, year two guys. It's one thing to flash periodically in practice and say, oh, that kid's got a bright future. And then it's another thing to be a reliable pass catcher every single practice and continue to be, a reliable part of the offense. And that's what stands out to me about both JoJo Trader, Malachi Tony, and Elijah Lofton. These are all guys that we know at some point during their college football career at Miami, they're going to be really good football players. Can it be in 2025? Well, we want to see consistency. And every time you open up the spring practice notes, JoJo Trader getting open, catching footballs. Malachi Tony getting open, catching footballs. Elijah Lofton, the same thing. The consistency from the young pass catchers is starting to stand out. We are 4 practices in. Every single time you read the spring practice notes, you're hearing good things about these pass catchers. This was a huge question mark for Miami heading into spring practice. Hey, should Miami get aggressive in the transfer portal for another wide receiver? Are we good enough at that position? I'm not quite up here saying we should not go and look for another pass catcher in that spring transfer portal window, but I am saying that I'm feeling a heck of a lot better about these pass catchers than I did 4 weeks ago before we started spring practice. I think another name to probably mention is Dalen Upshaw. Another true freshman. Not sure how much he will play. You start to see his name pop up in the spring practice notes as well. Last storyline, Ryan Rodriguez. I think he's going to start for this Miami Hurricanes team up front. Look, if he's beating out the likes of Samson Okunlola or a guy like Matt McCoy, I feel good about it. And that's the beauty of having depth on the offensive line, where it's like, hey, Ryan Rodriguez is not winning or starting for Miami in 2025. If he does start, he's not starting out of necessity. He's starting because he's beating out a guy like Matt McCoy or a guy like Samson Okunlola. And when you're beating out those guys, you feel good about what you're going to get from that left guard position in Ryan Rodriguez. The rest of the offensive line, Francis Mauigoa, I think, is going to be a top 15 pick in the NFL draft in 12 months. Markel Bell has the upside of a first-round NFL draft pick. James Brockemeyer, maybe not the upside that the two tackles have, but he's dang solid. And we know Inez Cooper is one of the best guards in the country. Look at this offensive line and say, you're feeling really good about what it's going to be, and you're starting to feel really good about Ryan Rodriguez continuing to look the part as a starting caliber offensive lineman, regardless if he starts or not. That's another body that you can depend on in the 2025 season. It's spring practice. You don't mean to put too much stock in it, but if you're a Miami Hurricane fan, you are liking what you're hearing. And I think the last thing I'll say, I probably should have mentioned this earlier, these wide receivers stepping up. It's different to step up this year in spring practice than it was last year. Last year we did hear about pass catchers playing really well for Miami. That passing attack between Cam Ward and the pass catchers really, really good. Turned out it was really good in the 2024 season. Guys like JoJo Trader and Malachi Tony, Elijah Lofton stepping up in this year's spring practice with how good I think the defensive backs are for Miami this year as opposed to last. That makes you feel good about what they can do as well, because it ain't a just really bad secondary like it was last year in spring practice going into 2024. We'll close it out there. Continuing to hear about some intriguing names stepping up. We'll continue to talk about the names that generate buzz all the way through the spring game. We got a lot to talk about on the recruiting trail as well. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.